What is going on, everybody, and welcome to a brand new review. Today we are going to be talking about one of the most influential, classic, and appreciated slasher films of all time, and of course, that is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, real quick, before we get into the main points of this video, this is kicking off a whole review series, which is called the Ice Nine Kills review series. Now, if you don't know what Ice Nine Kills is, they are a metalcore band based out of Boston and Los Angeles. I've been a big fan of them for the last couple of years. The last two albums they've put out, The Silver Scream and The Silver Scream 2, Welcome to Horrorwood. Every song on those albums has been based off of a horror film, and there's so much variety in the films that they chose. So I thought it would be an awesome idea to go through both of these albums and talk about each movie that corresponds to a song on the album. I'm going to go through all of that, talk about all those films, and then compile it into a whole big ass list at the end of the series, and we'll do a big ranking of those films and those songs. I'm going to have a few guests and special people coming in to help me finish this series because it's a lot and it's always cool to get differing opinions. So it's going to be a long one, but it's going to be worth it, I promise. I hope you guys are ready for the ride that is about to happen. I know I am. With all of that being said, let's talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street. The inception of the original Nightmare on Elm Street was 100% the brainchild of the great horror director Wes Craven. It's strange because he never wanted to be titled as one of the horror gods, even though he definitely was. He wrote and directed this film taking heavy inspiration from news headlines printed in the LA Times going around in the 70s. It was essentially about this family that had escaped Cambodia, and the son was having these extreme night terrors where he would wake up screaming and all of that, and one night he went to bed, everything seemed fine, and then he ended up screaming, having these night terrors again, and ended up dying in his sleep. While the actual story of A Nightmare on Elm Street isn't based off of this story, the events surrounding sleep and death have become pretty much the central line of the films. Freddy Krueger was created as the personification of these events and is now regarded as one of the most well-known and iconic slashers of all time. However, this story about people dying in their sleep isn't the only thing that went into creating Freddy. Wes Craven has gone on record to say he was bullied in school by a kid named Fred Krueger. So you're telling me Wes Craven named a child murdering burn victim that was killed by a bunch of parents after his real-life childhood bully? That is some sweet-ass revenge if that got back to the real Fred Krueger, my god. Now this is what really changed the tide of Wes Craven's career. He had done films like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes 1 and 2, but this is the one that gave him that status of horror god and the prestige that came with that. And that's how he continued the rest of his career. The studio behind this film is, of course, New Line Cinema. I was introduced to them pretty early on in my life through the Lord of the Rings films. I watched Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time maybe when I was like 8 or 9. I immediately recognized the studio and knew this film was going to be pretty badass. Now getting into the actual movie, this is one of the greatest slasher films ever made, in my opinion. I know a lot of people share that opinion. It is extremely fresh and innovative for horror. At the time, we had mostly seen Friday the 13th and Halloween entries up until this point, but this film brought that level of innovation and newness and uniqueness. That all starts with our killer, Freddy Krueger. Freddy is one of the most iconic villains ever created. He was a child murderer, and there is some subtext under the surface of him doing a little bit more than murder. He was burned to death by the parents of Elm Street, only for him to come back to murder these kids in their dreams. That is the main reason he's referred to as the Dream Demon sometimes. Freddy is also one of the first slasher villains not to have some sort of mask. He does have severe burns on his face distorting it, which gives it this creepy and scary effect, but it's still very realistic. But yes, Freddy can also talk and has his own personality, which is fairly new for slasher villains at this time. Up until this point, we've had Jason, Michael, Leatherface. They all wear masks and they all stay silent for the most part. But yes, in this film, we get the darker version of Freddy Krueger. In the later sequels, he gets extremely comical and cracks really shitty jokes and quips after every kill, but he is legitimately pretty damn scary in this original film. While he's a constant presence throughout the movie, he's shown very minimalistically and sparingly. Also shown through the sequels as well as movies like Freddy vs. Jason. The more fear that builds up around Freddy, the darker and more maniacal he gets. He gets his power from fear, and that's such an integral part of this film. Speaking of fear, let's talk about some of these kids. The movie really pulls a bait and switch on you with the character of Tina. Similar to Marion Crane from Psycho, we follow Tina for a good 20 minutes of the movie, and she is kind of established as the main character, but she is killed off extremely early in one of Slasher's greatest kills ever. It's probably the most memorable thing about her character. Yeah, so this is one of the most innovative kills in slasher history, and it is so cool the way they were able to achieve it. They built a custom rotating room. The boyfriend character was kind of strapped to his chair with a seat belt, and they sprayed his hair down so it didn't stand up and everything. Amanda Wise, the actress who played Tina, actually said this gave her vertigo and she was disoriented the whole time while filming. She actually ended up hitting the set wall pretty hard, which caused the disorientation and vertigo, but they left it in the actual film because it looked really good as a final product. That is some dedication right there. So now let's talk about our protagonist, Nancy. She's played by Heather Langenkamp and has turned into one of the best horror protagonists and final girls of all time. With slashers exploding into the mainstream around this time, you would be hard-pressed to find a final girl that gets really sick of the villain shit and takes it upon herself to defeat the evil. Wes Craven wanted a character that could rise to the occasion and fight back head-on, and that is Nancy in this film. She is beating Freddy's ass by the time this movie reaches its third act, and it's pretty fucking awesome. As far as final girls go, it's really cool to see how this movie separates itself from other slasher films that we have seen. Most of the time, when you get into Friday the 13th movies or even some Halloween movies, you're kind of there to see Jason and Michael fuck people up. And in the later half of this franchise, that is what happens to Freddy. But with this first film, you go into it really liking all these characters, Nancy especially, since she is our protagonist. You want her to triumph over this evil. You want her to beat Freddy, especially when she's setting up these deadly Home Alone style booby traps for the final fight. You care about this character. She has morals. She has a personality. You want her to win, even though you think Freddy is also cool. She has so many struggles throughout this movie. I mean, her parents are pretty bad. Nobody will believe her about everything she's trying to say. Very Child's Play-like, even though this did it first. This point leads me to our other main characters. Glenn, played by Johnny Depp. Now, this was Johnny Depp's first role as an actor. This movie really got his name out there and basically gave him the career he has now. Glenn is Nancy's boyfriend and is constantly questioning her throughout the film. Whenever Nancy asks him to watch her while she goes to sleep and tries to figure out what exactly is going on, he never really listens to her. He always falls asleep until Nancy is ultimately attacked by Freddy. Up until the point where he is finally killed by Freddy, he never really comes around to the idea that Freddy is real or even that there's a sense of danger. His death scene is right up there with Tina's death. It's extremely iconic and one of the most memorable things about this film. Glenn falls asleep watching TV and gets dragged down a hole that opens up in his bed. From there, a cyclone of blood shoots up and just sprays all over the fucking room and is a great effect. They reused the same set they filmed Tina's death on, but not so simply turned it upside down so it would have the effect of a tsunami of blood shooting out all over the ceiling. Unfortunately, this scene did not go as planned. It became very dangerous and hazardous for all the cast and crew on set that day. Wes Craven, Heather Langenkamp, and Robert Englund were all on set during filming. They used nearly 500 gallons of fake blood, which was mainly a mixture of water and corn syrup. They had dumped gallons of this stuff into the bed on set. This put a lot of weight onto the floor, and when it shifted the wrong way, that is when all hell broke loose. It came pouring out. Casted crew members were getting flung off the set. Really dangerous shit. A lot of fake blood got into the cameras they were using. Yeah, there were a bunch of electrical wires everywhere taped down on the floor. It shorted out the circuits, causing the power to go out. This left Wes Craven hanging upside down in a dark set for up to half an hour. That is pure dedication. The shots they did capture of the scene were salvageable from the cameras. However, later in discussion with the MPAA, the scene had to be shortened unless they wanted an X rating on this film. The MPAA sucks, dude. Now, the only real issue I have with this film is the last 2 to 3 minutes. It's well known that the end of A Nightmare on Elm Street was intended for Freddy to stay dead after the final fight with Nancy. This was Wes Craven's vision. The ending we actually got was a compromise ending between the studio and Wes. New Line wanted to leave room for sequels, and thus the whole franchise was born after this one. Now, what we actually got was Nancy's mom getting pulled into the house using this weird blow-up doll effect and having Nancy and her friends get consumed by the Freddy car. You can tell this whole sequence was shot as an afterthought and not really supposed to be part of the original film. It definitely stands out for being different. But with all that being said, the ending 2 to 3 minutes does not take anything away from how good this entire fucking movie is. I mean, it's essentially a perfect slasher in my eyes. I mean, it caused horror in the 80s to just keep going strong, and we're still here talking about it all these years later. We have gotten so many horror reboots, requels, sequels, whatever you want to call them, over the past couple years. Well, really since 2009. Where are the new Nightmare movies? Man, I know we're gonna get them one day. But yeah, this film created one of my personal favorite franchises in horror. Not all the movies are great, but I'm glad they all exist as a franchise. I think it's great. So yeah, that was my review of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Damn, this movie is awesome. I'm so glad I finally got to talk about it. I mean, I have that poster back there for a reason, man. Once again, this has kicked off the Ice 9 Kills review series. We're going to have a ton of more content going into that, as well as the Disturbing movie series being worked on right now. So if you guys like stuff that's a little bit darker, a little bit psychologically disturbing, I know it's gonna be great for me. I'm losing sleep over this shit, but it is something I want to talk about because it's interesting and very under talked about. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of the original A Nightmare on Elm Street. Is it as classic as everybody says it is, or are you one of the few people that doesn't like it? Let me know. Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you are excited for everything else that I have in the works right now, drop this video a like, please subscribe, stay tuned for all the cool stuff that I have coming up. But yeah, with all of that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.